Before we dive in, if you haven't watched yesterday's video about how Disney set Elio up to fail, hit the YouTube card on screen right now. That breakdown gives you the full context behind today's topic, especially when it comes to box office strategy and release timing. I've also dropped the link in the pinned comment and the description below, so go check that out first, and then come back to this video. Now, let's talk about something that's been bouncing around my head since I read that Game Rant article titled Lilo and Stitch and How to Train Your Dragon Prove Remakes Are Here to Stay. Because they're not wrong. Just one day after I posted that video on Elio, How to Train Your Dragon soared to #1 at the box office for the second weekend in a row. Lilo and Stitch is still holding strong. And Elio? It's officially Pixar's worst opening weekend ever. So today, we're not just talking numbers. We're responding to that article. We're unpacking why audiences keep showing up for live-action remakes, even when they say that they're tired of them. We're going to talk about emotional attachment, sacred cows, and why Stitch and Toothless are thriving while Elio got left behind. Let's start with the receipts. How to Train Your Dragon, the 2025 live-action remake, not the 2010 DreamWorks classic, has already made $385 million globally. That's more than halfway to surpassing the highest grossing film in the original trilogy, How to Train Your Dragon 2, which earned $621.5 million worldwide back in 2014. And Lilo and Stitch? Quietly becoming a juggernaut. It's now sitting at $910 million globally, with $386.7 million domestic and $523.6 million international. That's Disney's next billion-dollar remake. And it's doing it without the same blitz we saw for The Lion King or Beauty and the Beast. Meanwhile, Elio, an original film meant to kick off a whole new Pixar mythology, was left to battle two legacy properties that audiences already had deep emotional bonds with. The outcome? Inevitable. Disney's biggest live-action remake hits all have one thing in common: emotional attachment rooted in 90s nostalgia. I'm talking Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, The Lion King, all billion-dollar earners. And The Lion King, despite being fully animated in photorealistic CGI, still count as a quote-unquote live-action remake by Disney standards, pulling in $1.663 billion globally. But now, the pendulum is swinging. Lilo and Stitch hit theaters in 2002. How to Train Your Dragon debuted in 2010. These are 2000s kids' movies. The people who grew up with them? They're adults now. They've got bank accounts, nostalgia goggles, and a soft spot for stories about misunderstood outsiders finding their way. And studios? They've read the room. According to CBR Comic Book Resources, the success of the Lilo and Stitch remake has sparked renewed interest in the franchise's hidden gems. Stitch the Movie, a 2003 direct-to-video sequel that served as the pilot for Lilo and Stitch the series, is trending on Disney+. People are watching, rewatching, talking. So what's next? Could Lilo and Stitch the series see a resurgence? Could Leroy and Stitch, the 2006 Disney Channel original movie that closed the book on that storyline, get rediscovered? And what about Lilo and Stitch 2 Stitch Has a Glitch from 2005? That direct-to-video sequel is arguably the most emotional of them all. Is it time for that chapter to get its flowers too? Now contrast that with Aladdin. Disney Plus has the original 1992 movie, it has The Return of Jafar, the direct-to-video sequel that launched the Aladdin animated series, it has Aladdin and the King of Thieves, the finale, it even has the Hercules animated series and the crossover episode Hercules and the Arabian Night. But the actual Aladdin series? Not available. Completely missing. And that's fascinating when you remember Aladdin crossed $1 billion globally, the 2019 live-action remake. It's one of Disney's most successful live-action remakes. Yet the legacy content that built that nostalgia? Locked away in the infamous Disney vault. Meanwhile, Lilo and Stitch is quietly assembling a nostalgia empire across formats. It's a tale of two IP strategies, and one of them is winning the long game. Now let's zoom back in on Elio. I'm not going to repeat everything from yesterday's video, but I am going to point out how wild it is that Elio, an original Pixar film with decent reviews, had to face off against two legacy titans, and it got buried. That $21 million opening, that's below Onward, below The Good Dinosaur, below Cars 3. It's even below Toy Story from 1995, their first movie. Had Disney saved Elio for winter and released Zootopia 2 in the summer slot, they could have cleaned up. Barbenheimer in 2023 proved counter-programming works, and the 2024 Thanksgiving box office with Moana 2, Wicked, and Gladiator 2 was one of the biggest in history. The data was there, Disney just didn't use it. And now, let's talk about the controversy that didn't sink How to Train Your Dragon. When Nico Parker was cast as Astrid, the usual suspects came out swinging, "Race swap! Woke casting!" YouTube thumbnails lit up like it was 2018 again. But here's the truth. That was never going to be the real battleground. Because let's be honest, when people think of How to Train Your Dragon, they're not thinking about Astrid, or even Hiccup, or Stoic. The emotional core of that franchise has always been the dragons. It's Toothless. That's the character people fell in love with. That's the face on the merch, the plushies, the tattoos, and everything else in between. And that's why the real fear wasn't about Astrid's casting. It was whether Universal was gonna mess with Toothless. If they had tried to make him made him look realistic, like Paramount did with Sonic in that first Sonic the Hedgehog trailer, that would have been the outrage. Remember that? Sonic's human teeth, the weird proportions? The internet exploded. Paramount delayed the movie by nearly a year and completely redesigned Sonic to look like his video game counterpart. And it worked. Fans felt heard, the movie became a hit. Universal didn't make that mistake. They kept Toothless recognizable. They respected the emotional bond, and that's why the movie soared. Because emotional attachment isn't just about nostalgia, it's about recognition. When audiences see a character they love, they want to feel like they're seeing an old friend. Change that too much, and the whole thing falls apart. Now, I can already hear the rebuttal. But Snow White flop, that proves the outrage was valid. Let's unpack that. Yes, Disney's live-action Snow White was a box office disaster. A $269 million budget, and it couldn't even crack $210 million globally. But here's the thing. It didn't flop because of casting. It flopped because Snow White is a sacred cow. The 1937 original wasn't just Disney's first animated feature, it was the first full-length animated film in history. It's not just a movie, it's a monument. Touching it was always going to spark backlash no matter what they did. Same goes for Fantasia. If Disney ever announced a live-action remake of Fantasia, the internet would explode. And they've already tested those waters. Remember The Sorcerer's Apprentice from 2010? Nicolas Cage, Magic Mop references, a $150 million budget, and it barely scraped together $250 million worldwide. Audiences didn't want a reimagining of a sacred text, they wanted reverence. And here's another one, Toy Story. If Disney ever announced a live-action remake of Toy Story, the outrage would be instant and deafening. Because Toy Story isn't just a beloved film, it's a technological and cultural landmark. It was the first fully computer animated feature film in history. It changed the industry. It launched Pixar. It redefined what animation could be. That's sacred cow territory. Now contrast that with Lilo and Stitch and How to Train Your Dragon. These are beloved films, no doubt, but they're not foundational myths. They're not Snow White. They're not Fantasia. They're not Toy Story. Same goes for Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, and The Lion King. All great movies, all emotionally resonant, but they don't carry the same historical weight. They're not untouchable. And that's what made them viable candidates for reinvention. So when people point to Snow White and say, see, wokeness doesn't work, they're missing the real story. It's not about ideology, it's about iconography. Some stories are so deeply embedded in our cultural DNA that any attempt to modernize them feels like a violation, not a revival. Meanwhile, Lilo and Stitch and How to Train Your Dragon exist in that sweet spot. Beloved, nostalgic, but still flexible. Revered, not worshipped. And when you understand that distinction, everything else starts to make sense. So when Game Rant throws out titles like The Iron Giant, Hotel Transylvania, Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, or even The Polar Express as potential remake candidates, some folks laugh it off. Too soon, they say. Too iconic. But here's the thing. It's not really about time anymore. It's about emotional elasticity. The Lion King got remade after 25 years. Lilo and Stitch after 23. How to Train Your Dragon? Just 15. And all three are thriving. Why? Because those stories are loved, but not enshrined. They live in people's hearts, but not behind velvet ropes. That makes them viable. But a Toy Story remake? Wouldn't fly. It may only be from 1995, but it sits alongside Snow White and Fantasia in cultural impact. It started Pixar, it started a revolution, it's sacred. So yes, remakes are going to keep happening, but whether they work or not depends on something deeper than the IP. It depends on where that story lives in the culture. Is it nostalgic or is it sacred? Because once a story crosses that line, even the best intentions won't save a remake from rejection. So here's where we land. In the age of remakes, emotional attachment drives everything. It's why audiences showed up for Lilo and Stitch and How to Train Your Dragon. Not because the movies were controversy-free, but because those characters mattered to them. It was never about Astrid or even Hiccup. It was always about Toothless. Just like the real theory behind Sonic's original design wasn't about plot, it was that Sonic didn't look like Sonic. But here's the nuance. Emotional attachment has limits. Cross a certain threshold, and you leave the realm of nostalgia and enter the domain of sacred cows. That's where Snow White failed. That's why The Sorcerer's Apprentice fizzled. And if Disney ever announces a live-action remake of Toy Story, you'd see the exact same backlash. Because Toy Story isn't just another Pixar movie, it's the first fully CG animated feature in history. It redefined animation. It is film history. Sacred cows aren't defined by age, they're defined by impact. And when a film becomes that culturally foundational, any attempt to remix it feels like desecration, not celebration. Remakes succeed not just when audiences remember, but they're ready to revisit. That's the sweet spot. That's the difference between Elio and Toothless, between a stumble and $1 billion roar. So yes, the remake train is still moving, but whether it flies, swims, or crashes, that depends on entirely on what it's carrying and how sacred the cargo is. What do you think? Is emotional attachment the key to remake success, or is there something deeper going on here? And where do you draw the line between nostalgic and untouchable? Let me know in the comments. And if you made it all the way to the end, comment Toothless royalty below. You get it. You know what really moves audiences. And again, if you haven't already seen my video from yesterday about how Disney set Elio up to fail, watch that next. Because once you see the timing of these releases side by side, everything clicks.